Hello everyone, welcome once again to the fantastic world of stories from Kulture Katha. Friends, I'm super happy with the response I've got from my introductory video on the Mahabharata. A big thanks to you all, your feedback truly inspires me to try harder. So keep watching, sharing and commenting. Okay, let's not waste any more time and get to today's video quickly to explore, as I had promised, some diverse but contradictory ideas the epic presents us. Let me start with a story from the epic, a famous story from the Ashwamedhika Parvan about a golden mongoose. So, after the devastating Kurukshetra war is over, Vyasa and Krishna ask Yudhishtra to perform a huge, elaborate sacrifice called the Ashwamedha yagna. Now, Vedic sacrifices such as the Ashwamedha yagna were very elaborate affairs that could run on for months and involved huge resources and the sacrifice of several animals. Apart from pleasing the gods in heavens, the primary intention of these large sacrifices was to distribute the king's wealth among his subjects. So, huge gifts and donations were made to people, particularly Brahmins. In Yudhishtra's sacrifice too, gifts were distributed generously among Brahmins and they were all very pleased with the king and blessed him. But just as the sacrifice was over and everyone was preparing to leave, suddenly a mongoose with half its body covered in gold appeared there. The strange looking mongoose started to do a stranger thing. The animal started to roll on the ground, rubbing its body against the floor where the yagna had taken place. All the people assembled there were now curious to know what the animal was doing and why. As if sensing their curiosity, the mongoose started to speak and tell them a story about a poor Brahmin who practiced severe austerities. The Brahmin and his family lived on very meager food resources. They only ate food made from the grains that were left over in the fields after the harvest. This practice was called uncha and was considered the most non-violent means of nourishing oneself. Unfortunately for the Brahmin family, a terrible drought struck the place where they were living. And so the fields lay bare. There were no harvests and the Brahmin could not gather enough food for his family. So everyone in his family went hungry for days. Finally, on one fine day, with great difficulty, he managed to gather some barley grains which he brought home to share with his family. But just as the family was about to eat the food, the cooked barley grains, an unexpected and hungry guest entered their house. In Hindu tradition, as we all know, an unexpected guest or atithi is placed above even the gods. And so, considering it their utmost duty, the Brahmin's family gave away the little food they had completely to the guest, although they were themselves starving. For this act of generosity and for putting the needs of the guest above their own, the Brahmin's family obtained the heavens. Breaking the story here, the mongoose said that it had rolled on the ground where the barley grains had been cooked in the Brahmin's house. And it was then and there that the part of its body that had touched the ground had turned to gold. Since then, the mongoose had been looking for a place that equaled the generosity of the Brahmin's family, where it could turn the other half of its body also into gold. Sadly, he was disappointed not to find it anywhere, including the places where extravagant gifts were being made at sacrifices conducted by great kings. Even the great king Yudhishtra's Ashwamedha yagna had failed to live up to the extraordinary gesture of the Brahmin family. So saying, the mongoose disappeared. The story of the mongoose, of course, ends there. But one can't help wonder what the purpose of the story in the epic is. Why is it being told in this particular context? When we think about the story, we realize that this story compares the society's need for hardcore rituals such as Vedic sacrifices with the need for basic human virtues of kindness, truthfulness, and generosity. And it clearly upholds these humanitarian qualities over ritual sacrifices. The entire narration of the story is made by the mongoose to the Brahmins gathered at the yagna, as if to tell them that the yagna they had helped Yudhishtra perform was no comparison to the sacrifice made by the Brahmin in the story. In other words, the mongoose story appears as a sort of an anti-climax, completely undermining the grand Ashwamedha yagna or sacrifice conducted by Yudhishtra, which incidentally is described in elaborate detail in this Parvan. And remember, it was none other than Krishna and Vyasa who had asked Yudhishtra to perform the yagna. So one can't help but ponder over the contradictory messaging here and wonder if the story originally belonged in the epic. Why would an author go on to set up a whole elaborate sequence of the yagna only to destroy its importance later? Also, what makes the story more ironic is that the story forms part of the Mahabharata, which was itself narrated for the first time in public at a huge ritual yagna organized by King Janamejaya, who was a descendant of the Pandavas. And it's not just with this story. There are so many instances one comes across in the Mahabharata where we find very contradictory messages. For example, we find stories that emphasize the need for us to engage with the world, be a part of the samsara, and perform our duties as a householder as decided by our circumstances. So in one story, a butcher who sells meat is considered to follow the righteous path by simply pursuing his family profession and taking care of his family members. The butcher in fact advises a Brahmin ascetic to give up his sannyas and go serve his aging parents. Whereas in another story, we find a bird hunter giving up his profession of catching birds after he realizes that he is pursuing an immoral profession by hurting innocent creatures. The hunter leaves his family, becomes an ascetic, gives up his life, and attains the heavens. Again, two very different ideas, one that urges us to embrace life and the world, and the other about a person who gives it all up. What makes the bird hunter story that teaches compassion to all living beings especially ironic is that it is narrated in the Shanti Parva after the end of the terribly violent Kurukshetra war that took thousands of lives. So what does all this mean? Well, nothing about the epic is simple, and there is no one straight answer for this either. But there are two ways we can understand the apparent contradictions in the text. One reason could be that the text was not composed by a single author at a single point in time, as we had seen in my previous video. So while Yudhishthira's Ashwamedha sacrifice was probably part of the older text, the mongoose story that highlights the futility of such sacrifices got added later when value systems had changed. Several scholars think that the period during which the epic was composed, edited and added to was a period of major transition, a period of intense change and thought ferment, a period when older values were giving way to new, a period when the Vedic religion and its sacrificial rituals were being questioned and newer religious ideas were being explored. It's no wonder that the epic is set at the cusp that marks the end of the Dwapara Yuga and the beginning of the Kali Yuga. It's very interesting how the epic liberally accommodates several diverse ideas under its umbrella, and yet works as a single unified text. So, what causes the underlying unity in this diversity? Yes, the epic is continuously focused in its exploration of the idea of dharma, or the right thing to do at any point in time, whoever we are, whatever our limitations. As we progress with the story, we'll find that the single thread that ties the different events and stories together is the epic's search for dharma, or the truth. But then, as the text itself says time and again, dharma is subtle, not easily defined or realized. As one scholar puts it, to realize dharma, different opinions must be listened to, for they may communicate the truth in different, sometimes even contradictory ways. Understanding this is understanding the nature of the text. So friends, keep this in mind as we start this epic journey together in my next video. Till I meet you all once again, it's Tata, bye bye, take care.